Tales of Estolia. Volume 1, The Promise of Zacharias. Part 3, Royal Transition. Chapter 1. Isolation. Boston, Massachusetts. 1958. Estolians who reflect on their lives, who compare their sacrifices and their blessings, will see how heavily the balance is and always has been in their favor. Alcideria Sebastiani Zakarian, Capitulo 51. The metallic squeak of the mail flap brought Jackie out of her reverie. She picked up the envelopes on their welcome mat. A bell began ringing urgently. Her father wanted her. She took the letters with her and ran up the stairs. He was sitting on the side of his bed. He had soiled his pajamas and bedclothes. Yes, father. She pushed the mail into her apron pocket. Clean this mess up, you damn spoiled girl, he demanded. She was used to his outbursts. If he did not have times when he was clear in the head, she would have been unable to tolerate his demanding, unreasonable, and verbally abusive behavior. She gave him a sponge bath before helping him into clean pajamas. He stood next to the bed, hanging onto the wall while she changed the bed for him. Sorry, Jackie, he said, his voice weak but clear-headed again. She hugged him, feeling how thin he was. He could not last much longer. When he went slack in her arms, she guided him back into the bed. He was almost fully under the covers when his face screwed up in pain and his legs jerked away from her in the grip of a muscle spasm. His foot hooked under her knees and she crashed backwards against the bedside table. He tried to catch her, but instead of keeping her from falling, he ended up striking her face. The table shattered completely, shards of glass showering the floor. She lay where she fell, the hard metal base of the table pressing against her shoulder blade, listening to the roaring of her heart. By the time she found the energy to pull herself to her feet, her father was asleep, seemingly unaware of the disaster. She hoped he would forget it. If he remembered, he would be appalled. She looked at the sea of shattered glass and felt woozy. It was only when she saw several drops of blood that she realized she was cut somewhere. Another drop brought her attention to her left arm. She had a deep cut from elbow to wrist that was steadily dripping. The pain of her backside told her she also had at least one piece of glass embedded in her buttocks. No major blood vessel was injured, or she would have more than drops. With every movement stinging, she swept up the shattered glass and maneuvered the heavy metal base of the table away from his room, stuffing it in the large space at the bottom of the linen closet. She could not leave it or he would be cut up the minute he tried to get out of bed. She would have to mop up the blood later. When she was done sweeping, she went into the hall bathroom and looked in the mirror at the cut on her forearm. It looked deep enough to need stitches. Her father's ring left a long scrape along the top of her cheekbone. Her right eye was swollen shut. When they moved into the apartment, her father praised the bathroom mirror, saying it was perfect for shaving. It wasn't, however, very useful for looking at what she was wearing or, in this situation, the damage to her rear. She got out a hand mirror but couldn't get a decent angle to look at the cut or cuts on her rear. She had a feeling they would look much worse than her arm or her face. She slowly went down the stairs, wincing with each step, while she tried to think through the options available to her. She wasn't sure how she would get her injuries looked at with her father so ill. She could just leave her father alone in the apartment and hope he did not have any issues while she was gone. Unfortunately, he was more likely to need her and get in trouble without her than he was to sleep. But she had no way of getting her injuries seen to if she couldn't leave. She couldn't afford a house call. Her thoughts drifted to the pile of bills he had organized on her father's desk. They were going to have their phone disconnected in 10 more days if they didn't pay, and other services soon after. Unless her father had money she didn't know about, she was not sure what they would do. The last 3 or 4 times he was clear-headed, he hinted that he had some solution, some way of solving their financial problems. When she pushed him for details, he merely brushed her curiosity aside with a smile. Her father's secret smile brought back dozens of wonderful memories. His playful nature, the way he often stopped, as if hypnotized by her mother's beauty. the way their eyes used to meet, and they would seem to communicate, without a single word. But his smile now was only an echo of what it used to be. She wished she could somehow reclaim her mother's wonderful presence and balancing force. Everything good and wonderful about life seemed to leak away as the months passed and her home life became increasingly unbearable. She reached behind herself, to try to judge how badly she was hurt. She winced as her finger was cut on a shard of glass embedded in her flesh. Her hand came away covered in blood. She stared at the blood, uncertain how to get her injuries treated without money and with her father needing constant supervision. In the middle of her indecision, the doorbell rang. She used her skirt to wipe the blood from her hands while she hurried to answer the door. The sound of the doorbell often set her father off. She winced as each step jarred her injuries. Chapter 2. House Call. I have always felt, as a physician, that the practice of medicine was uniquely suited to Estolians. From the time of Zacharias and Sebastian, the care of injuries and illnesses was delineated in detail in the ensayos, inscritos, and capitulos. Despite the fact that we were promised prosperity, we had the same issues with health that plagued much of mankind. How we treated those who were ill was the thing that set us apart. Melody Griggs Zakarian, Inscrito. Her first impression, when she opened the door, was that her visitor was large and vaguely foreign. He stared at her, slack-jawed, his brow wrinkled. "You have injured yourself. Have you called a physician?" His accent was decidedly foreign, though he spoke with perfect clarity. "Can I help you?" she asked him. After a brief hesitation, he said, "My name is Leo Zakarian. I came to see Peter Cathay. I wrote to tell him of my arrival." She pulled the mail out of her pocket and looked at it. One envelope had a foreign stamp and was addressed to her father. "If this is it," she said, showing it to the stranger, "then I'm afraid he hasn't seen it yet." The long gash in her arm was visible. He grabbed her wrist, his hold gentle but firm. "You need urgent medical attention. Have you been attacked?" She shook her head. Her brow wrinkled as she focused her attention on the hand on her wrist. As if in a trance, she responded, "I should see a doctor, but I cannot leave my father alone." She still needed to mop her father's bedroom floor and launder his sheets. She did not have time for mystery guests or injuries or doctors. Remembering her manners, she stepped back to allow him to enter the apartment. She almost fell as she slipped on liquid on the hardwood floor. Perplexed, she looked down and saw a small puddle of blood. If she was bleeding that badly, she had to see a doctor. They had no money to pay for one, even if she could leave her father alone. "I have a friend in this city, a doctor. I shall call him," her mysterious visitor said, decisively. "Do you have a telephone I might use?" He was quick to dial a number as soon as she showed him the telephone by the front door. "Alan, it is Leo Zakarian. I had hoped to visit with you tomorrow, but I have a problem and wondered if you were free at this very moment." He listened for a minute before saying, "I am glad to hear it, Alan. A young acquaintance of mine has urgent need of stitches but apparently cannot leave her home. I believe she would benefit from your care." He proceeded to give her address and then hung up. "My dear, you must sit down and rest, you have a serious wound." She shook her head. The limitations imposed by her injury were starting to sink in. "I can't sit." She turned reluctantly away from him, allowing him to see the ruin of her mother's favorite skirt, and the torn flesh beneath. He exclaimed something in his native language, before adding, "What has caused this?" He frowned, seeming to be at a loss. Perhaps you should lie upon your stomach while waiting for my friend? The thought of getting off her feet was appealing. I would like that, she said. When she turned to lead him up the stairs, she was appalled at the amount of blood on the staircase. She had no idea she was bleeding that badly. The whole foyer looked like someone had been murdered there. They went up the stairs and she pushed open her bedroom door. Her hands began to shake and she leaned against her dresser, reaction setting in. Will you be self-conscious if I remove your lower garments? The stranger asked. It was an absurd question to ask. Of course she would be self-conscious. But she wasn't sure she could do anything for herself. She was lightheaded and queasy from the pain and wanted to get off her feet as soon as possible. She shook her head. He picked up a pair of scissors that were on her nightstand. Showing them to her, he said, "If you do not mind." She shook her head again. The skirt and undergarments were both destroyed already. It was her mother's poodle skirt he was cutting off her. She silently recited her times tables while he cut through her skirt and underpants. Once he was naked from the waist down, he went into the hall bathroom and came back with 2 towels. He laid one on the bed and assisted her to lay on her stomach, and then he lightly draped the second towel over her naked rear. Once she was decently covered, he bent to remove her black and white saddle shoes, carefully setting them to the side. He was a very methodical, focused individual. He placed the shoes neatly side by side near the foot of the bed. He also carefully folded up her destroyed skirt with the shredded briefs tucked up inside. Just as he finished, a high-pitched bell started to ring. She tried to get up but he said, "I shall handle this." "My father," she said hurriedly, "he's not himself." He reassured her and then left. He was gone perhaps 10 minutes when she heard the doorbell followed by the sound of him going down the stairs. The murmur of masculine voices preceded her door opening. Her swollen eye was towards the door, so she could not see who entered. "My father?" she asked. "He needed assistance to use the facilities," her visitor said, as if it was a normal thing to help an old man urinate. "My friend here is Dr. Alan Wade. He will look at your injuries." "How did you do this?" The doctor's voice was grumbly and old, with undertones of kindness and compassion. "My father isn't well. I was helping him into bed when he had a muscle spasm and knocked me off balance. I fell against an old glass-topped night table. I'm afraid it broke my fall and I shattered it." "How long ago was this?" "Perhaps an hour, maybe a little less." The doctor used a damp towel to clean her lacerations. She winced as he found and plucked out numerous pieces of glass. He kept up a running commentary which helped her to keep her mind off the fact that the doctor and the stranger were getting an eyeful of her naked rear end. Several more times her father rang his bell while the doctor was tending her. Each time the stranger went to see to his needs. Finally, the doctor said to her, "You've got 3 long gashes and 4 or 5 deep ones that need to be stitched. I don't think you lost too much blood. You didn't sever any major blood vessels, but you should take it easy for the next month or so. You may have a reaction to the trauma you suffered, even if it seems relatively minor to you." She did not think the pain of having shards of glass picked out of her rear was minor. She winced as he proceeded to sew her up. Finally, he pronounced himself satisfied with his work. "You might have a few more shards embedded, but I got most of it out. The rest will work its way out over time." He examined the long cut on her forearm. "This will need stitches too, though it doesn't look like you have any glass in there." When he finished stitching her arm, he examined her face. "You'll have a really impressive black eye in the next few days, but otherwise I don't think there's any permanent injury." He gave her 2 pills and watched while she swallowed them. The stranger stepped back into the room and the doctor repeated his prognosis. "Alan," he addressed the doctor, "if you could spare a couple more minutes." With that, the 2 men left. Chapter 3. A Call for Help. I once thought that there was something wrong with the way our birth order was never properly recorded. There was something unsettling in never knowing, for sure, whether my brother was truly the firstborn and destined to be king, or if it should have been my place to be the heir apparent. Much later in my life, I was convinced that this was a trial I needed to overcome so that I could keep the soul of Estolia with sureness and certainty. Xavier Archimedes Zakarian, Capitulo 86. Once the two men were outside the bedroom door, the doctor said, "I gave her some heavy-duty painkillers. She'll be out like a light in the next few minutes." "I am sorry to ruin your plans for the evening," Leo said. "I came at the urging of my father, who is unable to travel far these days. He received a letter from one of his longtime friends, Peter Cathay, which was impossible to fathom. As I was making plans to visit the United States, my father begged me to check in on his friend. He was worried for him, and I wanted to ease his mind. I wrote to Peter to tell him I would be visiting. I received no response." As Leo led him towards the door at the end of the hall, the doctor said, "From what young Jackie tells me, Peter is phasing in and out of a state of senility or dementia. My father told me that Peter sounded almost suicidal in the letter he wrote. I would value your professional opinion." In the bedroom, an extremely thin man was weeping while he sat on the floor. "I can't keep on like this." He looked up at the two men. "I've got so little time left, and so much of it isn't even my time. I can't bear to think about my poor daughter." Leo helped him to his feet and back to his bed. "You wrote asking my father, Xavier Zakarian, to come and help you. He could not make it, but he sent me." Peter gave a defeated sigh. "I knew it was a long shot. Why should he do it? Why should he take on a burden he doesn't deserve?" "You mentioned you had very little time left," Alan said. "I take it you have a brain tumor?" "Yes. I've already lived 10 months longer than predicted. It can only be days left. Perhaps hours? I love my daughter, but she doesn't deserve this." "What task did you want my father to undertake for you?" Leo asked him. "Oh, well, take care of Jackie, of course. But it's stupid. Why should he? My father would wish to help you. I can speak for him and agree to help you." "You're sure?" he asked. When Leo nodded, the old man seemed to collapse in on himself, as if the tension of his worries about his daughter kept him rigid and taut. "I'm more grateful than you know, to have her future secure." Then he looked up, his expression altered. He screamed, "Who the hell are you?" "Jackie. Out. Get out. Intruders. Jackie." He started to slam the bed on either side of his skeletal legs, and then he quieted down, slumping sideways, and passed out. "Without his medical records I can't be certain," Alan said, "but I'd say days or even hours are all that is left. He might not have any more moments where he is clear-headed. He needs professional care. Do you know of a place where we can get him care? I can make a few phone calls if you like. I'm pretty sure that within the hour I can get him situated in a top-rated nursing home. You'll pay for it?" Leo nodded. "I will stay here and help the young woman and be there for her when her father passes on." The two men left the room and were chatting amiably in the hallway when they heard the unmistakable bang of a firearm. They returned rapidly to the bedroom, remaining in the room only briefly once it was clear what happened. Peter knew he was a burden for his daughter, that he was putting his daughter through hell. When he was certain she would be cared for, he chose to take his own life. "I must check on his daughter," Leo said. She was sleeping on her side, a troubled frown between her brows. The pills the doctor gave her were doing their magic. The staccato knock on the apartment door was inevitable after the loud report of the firearm. Leo was not at all surprised to find a peace officer on the other side of the door. "Is everything all right here?" said the police officer. He was eyeing the blood-spattered foyer and the blood on the stairs. "I was just preparing to make a phone call to the police," Leo said sadly. "I am afraid that my friend is dead. He accidentally injured his daughter, and then took his own life." The police officer came in and Leo took him upstairs to the bedroom. Alan was standing outside the room. When he shared his identity, the police officer wanted to see the woman too. "Why weren't we called when she was first injured?" he asked after he saw the sleeping woman. The doctor explained the effects of the brain tumor, adding, "Until he killed himself, we considered it to be a matter for medical professionals instead of police." Jackie slept on, under the influence of the pain pills while the coroner came and took her father's body away. Once the doctor left, Leo decided to clean the bedroom as best he could. The cold truth of her father's death could not be avoided, but at least he could assure that she did not have the resulting mess to clean also. Once he finished cleaning the bedroom, he went back down to the ground floor. He saw a neat stack of mail she had obviously been organizing to show her father. Out of curiosity, he looked through the envelopes. Several had ominous final notice in red stamped on them. He grouped together all the envelopes from different sources. Almost 6 months' worth of bills had been ignored. Telephone, water, gas, garbage, milk. The only bill not marked with a final notice was an electricity bill, which had been paid in advance. A well-used bank book told him the rest of the story. With less than $18 in the bank, she was in dire financial straits. Glancing at his watch, he added 6 hours to the local time. It was not too late in the day to call his father. While he waited for the operator to put through the international overseas call, he totaled the bills and had an amount that would be necessary just to keep her from bankruptcy. When his call came through, he picked up the phone. Leo was thankful that his father's infirmities were not of the mind. He sounded robust and healthy. Despite his inability to walk, he was as sharp as ever and likely to live another 30 or more years. "Hello, Father," he said, and then proceeded to outline the events of the day, finishing with a summary of her finances. His father was silent for several seconds. "I am sorry, son, I had no idea what you would be walking into. We must help his daughter. Get her affairs in order as she heals, and when she is recovered, bring her here. I will give some thought as to how we can best help her." Leo hung up after speaking with his father and pulled out a checkbook that would draw on an American bank. He systematically paid each of her bills with a request to close the account. For the rent and utilities, he paid until the end of the month and requested that services be terminated at that point in time. Finally, all the bills were paid, and her financial affairs were in order. If he was going to bring her back to Estolia, she would have to travel via sailboat. There was no way she could tolerate the flight sitting in a regular airline seat. He knew from his explorations that the apartment had only 2 bedrooms. In the living room they had a 2-seater sofa with wooden arms unsuitable to sleep on. Though he cleaned the master bedroom, the mattress was saturated and he could not sleep on it, even if he could bring himself to use a room that had known such a violent act. The only other choice he had was to sleep next to the sleeping beauty herself. He could not just leave her alone and return to his hotel. She was still deeply asleep when he lay on the covers next to her. She would sleep for hours, he reasoned, which meant he could catch a few hours of sleep. Trying to find a comfortable position, he put an arm around her gently. Hopefully she would remain asleep, but perhaps, if she woke up, she would be comforted to experience some human contact and warmth. As he began to nod off to sleep, he decided that they would use the sailboat promise of deity and sail home. Chapter 4. A Favor. When I saved Samuel Omador's life in London, I thought at the time that I was an idealistic fool for throwing away my chance to marry Teresa. Once I met your mother, Jackie, I knew it was the best thing to ever happen to me. Esme was the love of my life, and I would not trade away a single second of our time together. Letter from Peter Cathay to his daughter. When Leo woke, he was stiff from remaining in the same position all night. The injured woman was still asleep. He would have to give her the bad news once she woke up. She would face the emotional fallout of contradictory emotions, grief and relief. The pain of losing her father warring with the release of responsibility combined with the guilt of feeling relieved. He slipped out of bed and went into the bathroom to freshen up as much as possible. In the kitchen he looked in the refrigerator. Seeing the ingredients were available, he prepared a quiche and put it in the oven to bake. He sat at the table so he could make several phone calls to arrange the Estolian sailboat, promise of deity to be prepped for a transatlantic journey. Jackie might balk at the thought of traveling to Estolia, but when Leo presented the alternatives to her, emphasizing that it was her father's dying wish, she would hopefully agree. His thoughts turned to Estolia and Sebastian. His cousin wasn't settling well into the role of heir apparent. His trials must be a part of the grand design, something that would make perfect sense from a historical perspective. He hoped that his cousin would navigate the difficulties facing him. Otherwise Leo might be forced into the role of keeper and leader of the faith. No, Sebastian had to shape up for the position. Because his father and the king were twins, the transition would be more interesting than usual. The king and keeper were twins only 4 times in 85 generations. In those previous situations, the king's son was always at least a week older than his cousin. Until Leo. He was born a week before his cousin. Because of this unique situation, both his father and uncle felt that Sebastian, as the heir apparent, should give his soul into the keeping of his future spouse before Leo did. Leo would give his soul into the keeping of his future wife the minute deity wished it, the minute it was right for the two of them. He heard Jackie stirring. After a brief knock on her bedroom door, he entered the room. She was weeping. "What is it?" he asked her. "I can't get up," she confessed. Recalling that she was only half dressed, he asked her, "If I get you a nightgown, will you be able to change into it on your own?" "There's a nightgown in the top drawer." 5 minutes later, she bade him to enter the bedroom. She was wearing a long cotton nightdress. It did not take long for him to help her to her feet and to the bathroom. "I will be right here in the hallway in case you need any help." As he guided her back to her room, she stopped with a jerk. She was looking at the open bedroom door at the other end of the hallway. From where they stood, they could see that the bed was stripped of its bedclothes. She looked up at him. Her brown eyes were overflowing with tears and she said, "He's dead, isn't he?" "I am sorry." He didn't know what else to say. She nodded in acceptance. Her eyes went to the stairs and he could interpret her look. She was thinking of the overdue bills waiting on her father's desk. He began to guide her back to her room. "Your father called in a favor," he said. "He has asked me to take care of you. You and your happiness and future security were his last thoughts. He loved you." Once in her bedroom she got a puzzled expression on her face. "What was your name again?" "Leo Zakarian. Our fathers were great friends. At his request, I have arranged for you to sail to my country with me. You can recuperate during the journey." "My name is Jackie," she said. Her eyes traced back to where the desk was. "I can't leave the country without settling my father's debts. I took the liberty of settling them for you." Her eyes were wide as she looked up at him. "How will I repay you?" "My father owed a debt to yours. I do not know all the details. By the time you have fully recovered we will arrive in Estolia and we will ask my father to tell us the story. I am certain we will work something out that will satisfy everyone involved." He smiled and added, "Please do not let it bother you. It was not a hardship to settle your debts, and it was your father's dying wish." He could see the weariness in her expression. Months of caring for her father, her injuries, and now finding out that he was were all taking their toll on her reserves. "When you wake up next, we will discuss the future." He picked up the vial of pills Alan left behind and shook 2 out onto the palm of his hand. "Take these, Jackie." Chapter 5. Opalescence. 6 weeks later. When my Uncle Theo asked me to enumerate the different ways that the aura was described in the capítulos, I thought the task was peculiar. Surely they would all be the same, or nearly the same? I was amazed at the different accounts I discovered. The aura was described as glowing and pulsing, golden, silver, black, and rainbow-colored. A diffuse background glow, and so brilliant and radiant that the man who viewed it was temporarily blinded. For some, it lasted only a few seconds from the first viewing, yet others could view it from the moment they met until they consummated their union. By the time I was done with my summation, I knew that I could easily write a book on that one topic. Uncle Theo, on hearing me say that, immediately endorsed the idea. Lazarus Ezekiel Zakarian, Prologue, The Story of the Aura. Jackie stood on the deck of the Promise of Deity, the wind in her hair, her eyes closed. They would be arriving in Estolia in the next couple of days. The deep exhaustion from tending her father's needs around the clock was nothing more than a memory. She gripped the rail. She had to face the truth. The reason she came up onto the deck in the first place. Infatuation. It had to be that. Leo would never want her. He was almost 30 years old, and she was only 20. Leo was the perfect knight in shining armor, sweeping into her life and easing the loss of her father, holding her during the funeral. She couldn't even imagine what she would have done if he didn't arrive when he did. She consciously eased her grip on the rail and forced a smile onto her face, focusing on all that was good about her life. She was crossing the Atlantic Ocean, a guest of Leopold Zakarian, who was the son of one of her father's friends. He was rich, with a whole crew on the large sailboat seeing to their comfort and serving them like they were royalty. She tried to think of the future. With the opportunities afforded by this new adventure, she was likely to meet dozens of handsome men, falling all over themselves to date her. It was better to focus on the exciting future ahead of her and ignore the yawning emptiness she felt every time she told herself that Leo would never see her as anything other than a friend. Leo stepped out of his cabin and came to a halt. Jackie was standing on the deck looking out over the water. The sunshine slanting down onto her gave her the appearance of glowing with an opalescent shimmer. He glanced at the sky with a frown, and saw that it was overcast, the sun hidden behind the clouds. He looked back at Jackie. She was still bathed in a brilliant light. From the beginning he was attracted to her beautiful willowy body and admired her chocolate brown hair and eyes. But he had kept her at a distance, treating her like he treated his sisters and female cousins. He crossed over to where she was standing, drawn by the flame of what could only be her aura. When he reached her, he set his hands on her shoulders, feeling with an almost electric thrill the physical manifestation of the aura. Something his forebears had obsessed over with their attempts to describe it adequately. As her brilliance bathed each cell in his body, he began to understand this obsession. Having felt the warmth of her aura, he wanted to be able to describe what he felt so his own sons might understand better than the existing texts, poetry, and prose were able to explain. Yet, how could he explain what it felt like to see a woman standing in shadows yet bathed in the warm glow of her aura? How could words explain the way his soul responded to hers? Jackie turned around. The lessons from his year as an acolyte came back to him. Warnings about the way it would feel when he finally met the woman destined to keep his soul. Once felt, once seen, his soul would begin to yearn to rest within her keeping. His earlier desire for her was explained. Now he wanted her more than any other woman he had ever known. He was looking at his Kaylee.
You are looking particularly lovely today.
When will we arrive in Estolia?
We might get there tomorrow. The day after at the latest.
Where will I live?
In the palace. I do not think I ever properly explained, my father is the keeper, the leader of our state religion. My uncle is the king. It is a very small country. Please do not feel at all self-conscious. We are just people.
How did my father ever get involved in your family?
The letter I got from my father when we stopped in Tenerife explained in greater detail. He met your father in London. Your father saved my cousin Samuel's life. Unfortunately, he was badly injured and broke both of his legs. My uncle, who was practicing as an orthopedic surgeon at the time, was able to operate on him and save his legs.
Is this the uncle who is now the king?
Her voice, like the glow of her aura, seemed to have an effect on him. He had to struggle to concentrate on her words.
Yes, Jackie, your father, once he recovered from his broken legs, went on to introduce my parents to each other.
That's romantic.
Jackie's cheeks turned rosy.
The Estolian religion itself is based on the concept of romantic love.
Really? Tell me about it.
He laughed outright, feeling suddenly free.
I will tell you all about it. You will learn much about Estolia. This next year is our transition year. We only have one every 30 years. In fact, we will begin the celebrations within a few days of our arrival.
What is it about?
After we arrive, my father will pass one of his titles, Last Resort, on to my cousin Gregory. Shortly thereafter, Sebastian, the royal heir, will be married, and within the year, crowned. It is an exciting time in Estolia.
Chapter 6. Demands of the Spirit. When Catherine and I discussed names for our first child, I told her how much I admired Sebastian, from the time of Zacharias. He deserved to have a king named after him. Perhaps my middle name influenced my choice. Catherine planned to use her grandfather's name for his second name. Sebastian Guillermo Zacharian. Xavier was troubled when he heard the name. I understood his concern, but my love for Catherine superseded the superstitions associated with the name William. Maximiliano Sebastian Zacharian, Capitulo 86. In the heart of Mount Estoliana, Xavier ran his thumb over the thick, faintly green envelope, and sealed it with traditional beeswax. The parchment-like paper was produced by the artisans in the temple, and he had no plans to change to the mass-produced paper products that had become increasingly available, at the expense of entire forests. It was personally fulfilling to dip a fountain pen in a bottle of Tarsus ink. It was so intrinsically Estolian, that he couldn't imagine foregoing the pleasure. Occasionally they received correspondence hoping to establish diplomatic relations between other nations and Estolia. Xavier's job included responding to every such overture of friendship. When moved by the spirit, he would invite the dignitaries to visit and see Estolia for themselves. His letter was in response to the Lion of Hath, a small country east of Greece. As soon as he read the brief, seemingly impersonal request for the chance to develop a relationship between the two nations, he felt a flood of warmth. The spirit made its own demands. He chose to respond right away and explain that, as honored as he was by the invitation to visit Hath, he could not travel far or comfortably in his wheelchair. Instead, he invited the lion to visit Estolia whenever it was convenient. This letter reminded him of the one he wrote to Leo a week ago. He explained how he met Peter Cathay. He, his twin brother Max, and their cousin Samuel spent nearly 12 years studying and working in London. Shortly before their scheduled return to Estolia, Samuel was crossing the street when a carriage careened out of control, heading directly towards him. Peter, seeing Samuel's danger, dashed across the road to shove him out of the pathway of the carriage, only to be trampled by the horses himself. Xavier, Max, and Samuel all met their respective Kayleys as a result of Peter's brave action. Since then, he and Peter corresponded 2 or 3 times a year. Xavier sprinkled absorbent sand over the address he had written on the envelope, and rang his bell. "See that this letter is ready for the mail plane to take to the mainland," he instructed the acolyte who entered his office. Once alone, Xavier leaned back in his chair and looked at the closed door. There was something else he had to do, something that had been at the back of his mind since he sent the letter to Tenerife. Now that his business correspondence was finished, he could focus inwardly, seeking the will of deity. Except he felt no impetus of the spirit. He looked at his calendar. 2 dates had elaborate decorations. He ran his forefinger over them and frowned. The 21st of July was Leo's 30th birthday. Whenever he thought about his sons, he felt a surge of pride in the men he and Harmony raised. They both had exceptional characters and personalities. 8 days after Leo, Sebastian would celebrate his birthday. The heir apparent. His brother's sons were both fine young men. He couldn't imagine Gregory as last resort. He didn't have the depth of character to take the role seriously. Last resort. He looked at the statue of Zacharias. The mellow stone statue was the most extraordinary ornament in the office of keeper. His wise countenance and beckoning arms had comforted Xavier times without number. But he was not seeking comfort. 2 items adorned the statue. Atop the slightly curly hair on the statue's head was the crown Xavier wore to the most formal occasions. His attention fell to the black sash. That was the task deity had set him. He had to make sure that Gregory understood the role he was to take on. It was time to make him last resort. Chapter 7. Command of the Keeper. Keeper is the position that ordinary Estolians understand the least. They see the king, with his crown, his white horses, and the luxury of all the pomp and circumstance, and can become envious. The Keeper instills fear and respect, in equal parts, to the men of Estolia. The time they spend as acolytes is responsible for both. The Keeper is like the headmaster at a school, the recognizable symbol of authority that all Estolians respect. Lazarus Ezekiel Zakarian, Capitulo 88. Gregory draped a towel around his hips and stepped out of the bathing room. His brother was standing in his room, dressed in his ceremonial outfit. "Uncle told me to bring you your formal outfit. Put it on," Sebastian said. He was in one of his dark moods. "Why?" Gregory blurted. "He wants you to take on the role of last resort. Now. He told me to bring you the robes, and said I should make sure that you shower and shave. He wants you in the entire outfit." Gregory groaned and rolled his eyes towards the ceiling. He planned to spend the day working with the temple artisans, crafting with seasoned motherwood. He was making a wooden flag of Estolia to give to Sebastian for his coronation. Traditionally, the heir would marry 7 days after his 30th birthday. 9 months later the next king would be born, and Sebastian would be crowned just after the baby's 7-day blessing. All of which meant that he, Gregory, had more than 9 months to finish his planned project. He would be using wood from the 3 species of tree that were unique to Estolia. Motherwood with its dark purple striations for the background, the rich greens of Mayberry for the 2 stylized mountains, spiritwood for the peaks of the mountains from the tree struck by lightning on the edge of the spirit grove. Not an easy wood to work with, but perfect for the project he was planning, with a flawless chocolate-colored grain. He had planned to meet with the artisans to see if there was a 4th type of wood, buttery yellow, from which he could fashion the stars on the flag. But, now, he would have to cancel or postpone his plans for the day. The robes for last resort were the first outfit he would wear, in the progression of roles that would culminate in him being keeper. Others who became keeper suffered a similar insecurity to that which had plagued him since he was an acolyte. When the day came to take on the role, they all felt and recorded a deep approval coming from deity, but he had grave doubts that he would ever grow into the position. When his uncle summoned him to discuss the schedule of instruction for keeper, he shared his reservations about filling the role. His cousin, Leo, was in the office and had volunteered. "I'll do all the training with you, if you would like." By the end of their discussion, he'd left the office, still unsettled, but he promised he would keep an open mind, and remain willing to be guided by the Spirit. "Greg?" Sebastian was impatient. "Yes?" Gregory asked, confused. "The robes. Sebastian gestured again to the colorful garments laid out on Gregory's bed. They are waiting for us in the ballroom garden. Gregory's good mood was restored by the time they arrived in the small garden just outside the ballroom. His father and uncle were dressed formally, his uncle in a sash that he did not recognize. It was brand new. Several scribes were recording every nuance of the ceremony for the official record. Gregory and Sebastian walked slowly, in a measured cadence, up to where their uncle sat in his wheelchair, and their father, the king, stood next to him. There were only about 20 individuals observing the ceremony. Their mother was sitting with their grandparents and with Leo's brother Theo, but the majority of those in attendance were elders and acolytes. Xavier nodded to them and then waved them towards a couple of chairs, saying once they were seated, traditionally this ceremony, to pass on the role of last resort, is accomplished with all involved standing. He gestured ruefully towards his wheelchair before adding, "We will adapt to fit within my limitations. I have asked you to be seated, as I believe that what I must say is critical. When I am done with my remarks, we will proceed with the ceremony." Gregory looked around, already bored by the thought of listening to his uncle speak on any topic for any length of time. When he saw his cousin Theo, literally on the edge of his seat, straining to capture every word, Gregory felt ashamed of his lack of focus. He, too, sat on the edge of his chair so he could try to give his uncle his full attention. When Estolia was in her infancy, and Zacharias spoke with deity, he was given extravagant promises that his people would enjoy prosperity, longevity, happiness and, above all other things, true love. The only constraint placed upon them was to keep the promise of Zacharias, that the heir be willing to wait until his 30th birthday to find a woman pure in body, self, and soul, give his soul into her keeping, wed her within a 7-day, and remain true to her all the days of his life. The greatest blessing the sons of Zacharias will receive, here upon the waking world, is the joy of placing their soul within the keeping of a perfect woman. She whom deity has prepared, and for whom we have likewise been prepared in equal measures. A match deity has tested for durability, compatibility, and soul-to-soul communication. No other people on earth know a joy as profound, nor a love as binding. When you find your Kaylee, your lifespan will be measured by hers. Gregory Anacharys Zacharian, as the last resort, you will make certain that your brother, Sebastian Guillermo Zacharian, does not break the promise of Zacharias. It is your role to watch out for him and to help him if he is tempted. Only one man in each generation is faced with this extraordinary burden. You must steel yourself to have the strength to protect our nation, the wisdom to guide your brother, and if necessary, the courage to take his place if deity demands it of you. Gregory felt peculiar throughout his uncle's long-winded speech. Glancing to the scribes, he was grateful that the speech was being recorded. He did not have the attention span to follow what he was hearing. He would have to read it later, to really absorb everything. It was the same with his blessing at 18. Only when he read it did it start to make sense. Over the next 15 minutes, Gregory accepted the sash of office, the fabric stiff and new, handling the ancient dagger with reverence. He went through the prescribed words, but all he could think about was whether he would have to continue to wear the temple garb. It was 2 years before he was supposed to become the keeper. He would ask his uncle as soon as he could. Chapter 8. Abdication. Like the 3 sets of twins who were king and keeper before us, Max and I were blessed to recognize our Kayleys on the same day and occupied both royal seclusion suites simultaneously, consummating our unions on our 30th birthday. Max and I spent the time I was healing, after I broke my leg as a child, studying the other twins who became king and keeper before us, including Kavanaugh and Lorenzo. What could fracture their relationship? Jealousy? Confusion? Malice? We promised each other that we would remain true to one another, to Zacharias' promise, and to Estolia. After Sebastian was born, I tried to understand the significance. Always before, the heir apparent was born before the son of the keeper, even with twins. Tremaine, in his Capitulo, wrote, "The heir apparent must be in seclusion before the son of the keeper." This eliminates doubts regarding who was to be king. Leo's birth, on the day that Sebastian was due, came as a surprise. In an effort to counteract any potential difficulties arising out of their peculiar birth order, I told Leo that he should wait until after his cousin's seclusion to experience it for himself. I was uncomfortable asking my son to give up that blessing, but I believed that deity would reward him for his willingness to make the sacrifice. Xavier Archimedes Zacharian, Capitulo 86. Sebastian watched the sun rise from the back of his stallion Altair. He felt no joy in the familiar view. As with everything else over the last 4 months, there was only emptiness and unhappiness. He heard the clatter of another horse behind him. Either his brother or his father had joined him. They had both been shadowing him for several weeks. "I do not wish to exercise my duties as last resort," Gregory said. "Has any heir abdicated before?" Sebastian asked. "Only twice has the last resort been called upon to act in his official capacity," Gregory said. "Both were different from your situation. Alexandros begged Apollyon to abdicate, but he refused to do it. That is the only time abdication is ever mentioned in the Capitulos." Sebastian shifted his horse so he could look at his brother. "I have read every story of every ancestor. Read all there is on the topic, as you have, brother. I do not believe it has ever happened this way. Has Uncle Xavier said anything?" Gregory moved his horse closer and reached out one hand to his brother so they could clasp forearms. "He asked me to bring you to him. That is why I followed." "Lead on then," Sebastian said. He turned his stallion towards the path, following his brother. When they reached the entrance to the temple, acolytes hastened to hold the bridle of each horse so they could dismount. The two brothers entered the temple, walking side by side down the hallway to the keeper's office. Their father the king, and their uncle the keeper, were both in the office, along with their cousin Theo. Sebastian, his brother, his father and his uncle were the 4 men with the highest rank in Estolia, the Strellarin, symbolized by the 4 central stars on the Estolian flag. According to everything he had ever read on the subject, he should be feeling the extraordinary power of having them all in the same room together. But all he felt was bitterness and exclusion. If he was honest with himself, he knew the reason. Melanie. She could not be Queen of Estolia, and he could not be king without her. "What obstacle stands in your way?" Xavier asked him. "The woman I belong with cannot keep my soul in the accepted traditions of Zacharias. She cannot be Queen of Estolia. There is no other woman alive who can keep my soul." He thought of Melanie again. His entire body yearned for her. After a moment, he said formally, "Though I have lived my entire life with every intention of being the king of Estolia, I find that given the choices available to me, I would rather be with Melanie than be king." As soon as he said the words, he felt a flood of warmth and peace. "Gregory?" Xavier asked. For just a moment, Gregory looked horrified. "I do not wish to be king. I am not the man for the position." He glanced from his brother to his cousin, and then the expression on his face changed to a grin. He got to his feet and moved to stand in front of Theo. He said formally, "Are you prepared to take on the duties of last resort?" Theo stood up and said, "It is my honor to serve Estolia, and to take on the role of last resort, to stand ready to take on the burdens of the crown should illness or iniquity render my brother, Balthazar Leopold Zacharian, unable to fulfill the promise of Zacharias as heir apparent, and as king of Estolia." Sebastian felt profound relief while his brother and cousin, father and uncle went through the prescribed words of the last resort ceremony. His thoughts were on Melanie. He could not leave Estolia during the transition, but once it was over, nothing on earth would keep him from going to her and begging her to have him. Once the ceremonial words were over, his uncle Xavier said to him, "When your father and I were born via caesarean section, our birth order was not recorded, and thus we did not know who was the rightful heir. When Leo was born a week before you, it seemed as if, perhaps, I should have been the one named king. He smiled at his brother before patting the arm of his wheelchair. I believe, given the accident I had and the way deity has whispered to me over the years, that I was always destined to be keeper. Does Leo know he is the heir apparent? Sebastian asked. Xavier responded, no. He will be most surprised when he arrives. The captain of the promise of deity is certain that the woman he is bringing back to Estolia will keep his soul, be his Kaylee. And you are certain, Gregory? Sebastian gestured to Theo wearing the sash. Yes. Gregory was emphatic. Theo always attended the training with me. I rather like the idea of another year of freedom before I must start looking around for my Kaylee. I was never keen on being last resort, and even less interested in being king. His expression took on a glow of happiness as he added, I can now concentrate on a future working with wood. After Leo's position is confirmed, you will be able to invite your Melanie here to Estolia, Xavier told Sebastian. Chapter 9. The Lie. Santa Rosa, California. I was anguished on Jeremiah's behalf when I learned about Kaylee's story. His response was genuine amusement. He said, Lorenzo, in the final entry of his capitulo, wrote that he and Beatrice had the ultimate union, and that Torizon would be disappointing. Nothing in the life after this life could possibly surpass the time spent with his Kaylee in this waking world. Jeremiah recognized my confusion. He elaborated, one does not pity the birds of the air, that they have wings instead of hands, nor the fish of the sea that they have gills instead of lungs. Nor should you pity me for the extraordinary blessing I am given each day, to be with Kaylee. Nicodemus Luciano Zakarian, Capitulo 89. What is it, Melanie? Bethany asked her friend. You have been moping around for the last 4 months. What's wrong? I think Sebastian was going to ask me to marry him, she said. I thought so too. What happened? Bethany asked. Melanie had tears tracing down her face. I lied to him, she whispered. I couldn't force him to be childless. Her hand went to her abdomen. Melanie fell off her horse in a cross-country competition. She was uninjured by the fall, but her horse, Chastain, maddened by the pain of a broken leg, went berserk. His flailing hooves broke her nose and sank into her abdomen, resulting in internal injuries. Miraculously, the only permanent injury she sustained was a ruptured uterus. She ended up getting a hysterectomy. For Melanie, the loss of her beloved Chastain was far more disturbing than the loss of children she may never want. What lie did you tell him? Melanie was not good at lying. I told him I was a wild child and had an abortion that went bad when I was 17. Why would you tell such lies? I don't know. She frowned. It just came to me suddenly that the only way to chase him away was to lie to him. He believed me. I was sure he'd want to sleep with me afterwards, so I sent him away. Her friend's unhappiness was one of her own making. He didn't love you enough, then, Bethany pointed out crisply. Melanie spoke slowly, her voice disturbed. I don't know, Beth, I think what I told him was more profoundly disturbing than it should have been. He looked at me as if I'd just given him a death sentence. Her expression grew alarmed. You don't think he'd kill himself, do you? Bethany snorted. Mel, if he gave you up, just because you could not have a child, he is not likely to kill himself out of heartbreak. The two women had been friends for 3 years. They met 6 weeks after Bethany and her father moved to California from London, when her father had accepted a 4-year teaching position in Santa Rosa. Bethany, always shy, was feeling lonely and homesick. She saw the advertisement for the equestrian competition and decided to try her skill photographing horses. She was at one of the most difficult jumps on the cross-country course, photographing the horses as they tried, and occasionally failed to complete the tricky jump. To Bethany, Melanie was just another competitor, but her horse was beautiful. She was testing out one of the settings on her brand new camera when the horse hit the jump wrong and horse and rider somersaulted over. She watched in horror as the horse went berserk and the rider looked like she was fatally injured, with her face a bloody mess, hysterical, in agony, pleading with the course veterinarian to save her equine partner. It was only later, as Bethany developed the photographs, that she realized how comprehensive they were, recording the entire disaster. The memory of Melanie's screams decided her, and she sought her out. By the end of Melanie's 3-week hospitalization, the two girls were close friends, despite the 3-year disparity in their ages. Melanie began writing the background information necessary to turn the photographs into coffee table picture books, and the friendship between the two girls blossomed into a full-fledged partnership. Now that Bethany was nearly 20 and Melanie was 23, they had 5 books to their credit. Somehow Melanie was always finding book deals for them through her wealthy contacts. Bethany received a request to do a more substantial book.
Dear Bethany Danielson, your talent as a photojournalist has come to our attention, and we would like to offer you and Miss Melanie Andrews a year-long commission. If you choose to accept it, you and Miss Andrews will be provided with transportation to and from Estolia. In addition, all other needs you have will be met. You and your partner will occupy a guest suite in the palace. We have a fine stable of gifted warm bloods from which your partner could select a mount to hone her riding skills. You may tell her that one of the horses, of Estolian breeding, could be her bonus at the end of the year, including transport back to the United States. The events we wish you to document will take place over the course of an entire year. Please call the phone number below as soon as you receive this letter and before you speak about it with Miss Andrews. Reverse the charges so that the phone call itself is not a financial burden. I will share with you more of the details at that time. Yours faithfully, Xavier Archimedes Zakarian, Keeper of the Soul of Estolia.
The phone conversation was enlightening. Xavier Zakarian explained that, while the job offer itself was valid, he had considered her for the job because of Melanie's relationship with Sebastian. I do not know, Miss Danielson, if Miss Andrews will patch up her relationship with my nephew Sebastian, or if there is no future in it. But I believe if you get your friend Melanie here to Estolia, then she and Sebastian will have the chance to iron out their difficulties and discover if they are perfectly suited, the one to the other. If you wish to help your friend out, you should convince her to accompany you on this commission. However, she is likely to refuse if she knows you are heading for Sebastian's home. They spoke for some time. By the time she hung up, she knew she was going to convince her friend to go with her on this assignment. Beth. Melanie's voice cut through her thoughts. Her expression was still unhappy. What did you need to see me about? I am sorry, Mel, I was just thinking about a job offer I got. It's a year-long assignment to create 2 books. It's a package deal, and they want us to fly out almost immediately. Bethany pulled out the photographs of 3 horses. The client will fly us in their private aeroplane. We will stay in a medieval palace. He is, apparently, one of the breeders of. She paused dramatically, Estolians. The 2 loves of Melanie's life were Sebastian Zakarian and horses. She had captured her friend's interest. You will be able to ride all of these 3 horses, Bethany added, and you will be able to select one as your bonus at the end of the assignment. With Melanie's eyes on the photograph, tracing the lines of the nearest horse, her question was almost asked in a trance, when do we leave? Chapter 10. Allure. While at Oxford, I studied modern and ancient religions. That was one of the most enlightening periods of my life. I was amazed at the man-made religious constructs designed to bring purpose and order to people's lives throughout the ages. In Estolia, deity asks for very little and gives great rewards for our faith. Other religions seem an inversion of what Estolians experience, asking much and giving little or nothing in return. Xavier Archimedes Zakarian, Capitulo 86. The sailboat Promise of Deity was nearing Gibraltar. Jackie and Leo were having dinner. We will arrive the day after tomorrow in the morning. Not quite in time to be there at dawn, but before noon at the very latest, Leo said. His smile was broad and he seemed more relaxed and joyful than before. Jackie sipped the wine he served her. You really love your country, don't you? He had changed over the last 24 hours, although she was not sure how. His expression when he looked at her that morning on the deck of the Promise of Deity had an extra level of warmth. Her isolation, after her mother died, and particularly once her father fell ill, meant that couldn't trust the impression she kept getting, that he was exhibiting all the signs of romantic interest and attraction. Even if she was imagining it, she enjoyed being with him and fantasizing that he had fallen in love with her. I do love my country. I am very excited to return. I did not expect to be away this long. I've inconvenienced you, Jackie said. I'm very sorry for taking so much of your time. No inconvenience, just a slight delay. It is my birthday tomorrow, and my cousin's a week thereafter. As he will be king, there are many festivities and ceremonies planned. He put a vinyl record on the turntable. Romantic music played softly in the background. He brought the wine back to the table so he could refill their glasses. He set the bottle down and bowed slightly before extending a hand to her. May I have this dance, Jackie? She put her hand in his and followed him from the dining alcove to the spacious lounge. She closed her eyes once she was in his arms, pretending they were on a date, that he wanted to dance with her because he was in love with her. She became aware of a hot, hard presence between them. Her eyes met his. Leo? You are incredibly beautiful, Jackie, he said. The expression on his face and the tone of his voice communicated more than his words could. He kissed her. His lips caressing, enticing, pulling a response from her. The brush of his tongue over her lower lip encouraged her to open to him, and the kiss transformed from gentle persuasion into flaming passion. He pulled her hips closer to his, the outline of his aroused flesh pressed against her. Jackie, he whispered, you are intoxicating. Extraordinary. Perfection. He pulled away so his eyes could search hers. After another long intoxicating kiss, his voice was thick with emotion when he said, Jackie, I want to give my soul into your keeping. I want to marry you. He meant it. He wanted to marry her. She felt like she could read his thoughts as she looked at him. From the time the stitches on her buttocks were removed, her daydreams were all about him falling madly in love with her. His eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of acquiescence or rejection. She was not sure what he saw, but he seemed pleased when he started to kiss her again. Their earlier passion intensified as Leo pulled her tight against him. Jackie felt like a volcano about to erupt, a balloon ready to burst as his kisses grew more passionate. When the music stopped, Leo pulled away from her, cooling the intensity between them. She slipped her hand in his and stepped away from him, leading him down the passageway to the door of his room. He stopped their progress with one hand on the door frame. He said, his voice lacking conviction, No, Jackie. She had a flush on her cheeks, her lips were swollen from his kisses, eyes dilated with desire. We must, Leo, she whispered. She deftly unbuttoned his shirt. He pushed the door to his room open and stepped inside, pulling her with him. She caressed his bare chest, his hair-roughened skin was moist, warm, almost hot to the touch, trembling in reaction to the brush of her fingers against him. His scent was musky. His head went back at the feel of her delicate fingers exploring his chest. He pushed the door shut and leaned against it. Despite his earlier protest, he found the thin straps at her shoulders, pushing them to the side until her dress fell off her body, pooling around her feet. She was not wearing a bra. When he opened his eyes, he sucked in his breath, looking at her body exposed to his view. She moved closer to him and allowed her fingertips to drift over his abdomen to the top of his trousers. When she fumbled in her attempts to unfasten his pants, Leo's hands settled over hers, as if he would stop her, and himself. She did not know what to say or do. Her tongue explored the swollen contours of her lower lip, and he watched it while he unfastened his pants and dropped them to the floor of his cabin. She was out of control. She wanted to discover what was possible with this man. She led him the short distance to his bed and ran her hands up his chest to his shoulders. "Jackie." He again protested, but then something within him snapped. In moments they were both naked, and he was pushing her back onto the bed. She was amazed at herself, at the wanton sensuality rushing through her. She never would have thought she would be in a position of being willing or able to seduce a man. She wrapped her legs around his waist, and the last thread of his self-control broke as his body plunged into hers, possessing her as much as she possessed him. Their frantic, passionate coupling was elemental, ignoring how untried she was, as Leo's fierce driving need was matched only by her own. The rush of pleasure as their lovemaking reached its crescendo was something she would remember for the rest of her life. What seemed like a long time passed before his breathing and heartbeat dropped back to normal. He held Jackie tightly against his body. He had no idea what would happen, but he knew one thing for certain: Jackie, this beautiful, extraordinary woman, had taken his soul into her keeping. The obligations were strictly delineated for the heir apparent. If he, Leo, was the heir instead of his cousin Sebastian, he would be marveling at the strength of character of the future queen. His brother's role as last resort would be ceremonial rather than functional. He would be proud to keep the promise of Zacharias for the 87th generation. In 9 months, when Jackie gave birth to their son, he would be ready to don the crown. He would be more certain than ever about the role of deity in the lives of all Estolians. His actions this night, and over the next 7 days, would assure his nation of both safety and prosperity as they began the successful transition to the 87th capitulo. Not once, in 86 capitulos and almost 2,700 years, had the son of the keeper been born before the heir to the throne. Never had the right of the heir apparent to bed and then wed his future wife prior to his cousin been an issue. He was third in line to the throne, yet was the oldest boy in the rising generation. Once he saw Jackie's aura, he realized the enormity of the sacrifice his father asked him to make, when he asked him to wait until Sebastian was done with his seclusion before beginning his own, and he could not do it. When faced with Jackie's sweet seduction of his sanity and senses, he was unable to avoid placing his soul within her keeping at the earliest possible moment. Chapter 11. Plans. The greatest consolation deity gives us, when we must do that which is normally more than any one person should be asked to do, is the pure sweet guidance of the Spirit telling us our choices are clear, our actions just. Lorenzo Delmont Zacharian, Capitulo 57. Xavier woke and kissed Harmony. She opened one eye and smiled at him before turning over to fall back asleep. After 30 years of marriage, she understood the odd hours demanded by his role as keeper. He pulled on his robes of office and transferred himself to his wheelchair. Once he was ready to leave the bedroom, he paused to fill his senses with the vision of his beautiful Kaylee. The acolytes assigned to serve his needs within the palace would alert his driver on the stable level that he was on his way. His carriage would be ready to transport him to the temple, and acolytes would be waiting to assist him into the carriage. Others would be waiting to help him when he arrived. When he first had his accident, he had been forced to decide whether they would install a ramp access to the temple and the inner dais. After some thought and prayer, he and his brother decided together that the integrity of their historic architecture mattered more than transitory convenience for one person. The service opportunities for acolytes would suffice. They would be able to bring him up the stairs in the temple whenever it was necessary. While he was undergoing rehabilitation, His brother worked with some of the skilled artisans to design, construct, and install an elevator in the palace. Once Xavier saw it, he marveled at the scope of the task and the elegance of the finished product. One could almost imagine that Amador, who designed both the palace and the temple, must have seen and planned for their future need. Before it was renovated, it was the smallest, least functional tower in the palace. Unlike the other towers, it was too narrow to be a residence. It was used only as a staircase twisting around the outer periphery to connect the palace with the stable level. The inner shaft was walled off, taken for granted, and neglected. He remembered the time when he and his brother counted the steps from the bottom to the top. 720 steps. A number he remembered easily, as it was the same as the number of years before the current era that Zacharias founded their nation. Now it was fully functional as an elevator. Not only did it help Xavier to maneuver around the palace with ease, it also enabled the residents of the palace to bypass the staircase and easily travel between the palace and the stables. Xavier's thoughts wandered as his carriage made its way down the rest of the palace road to the valley between the two mountains and then through the rich agricultural region that filled it. He recalled the story of Ulysses, keeper during one of the most turbulent periods of Estolian history. He broke his ankle and the physician realized it was infected. In those days, surgery was a matter of brute physical strength. His foot was detached by a blacksmith. When he recovered, the temple artisans devised for him a lightweight chair that the acolytes of the era moved about the temple and palace. He did not even have the luxury of a wheeled chair for mobility. When they reached the temple, Terence, Xavier's personal assistant, came out to the carriage and settled him into the wheelchair at the top of the stairs. Terence was no longer the young acolyte who saved his life after a near-fatal fall from the elbow of Mount Estoliana. He shrugged off thoughts of his assistant, the elevator, and his infirmity as he wheeled himself along and bypassed his office to go to the small room that was one of the few spaces that had been left almost exactly as it was from the inception of the temple. The floor was covered in the same tile as both foyers. It was a small room, too small for any real purpose. Amador declared it would be a perfect room wherein the different keepers could commune with deity. Not that they needed any special room for that purpose. But it did help to focus his thoughts. He spent half an hour thinking about the upcoming week. If he understood deity as well as he thought he did, then his son had already given his soul into the keeping of young Jackie. In the meantime, Sebastian's Melanie would be winging her way to Estolia. He hoped to encourage Sebastian to embrace her as his Kaylee, even if she could not provide him with all of the blessings promised by deity. The door opened, and he turned to see Theo standing behind him. Together they spent a few more minutes communing with deity before Theo pushed his chair out of the altar room and back into the office. Once Xavier was settled behind his desk, Theo sat in his customary chair next to the green and black marble statue of Zacharias. It looked strangely naked without the sash of office that had adorned it for the last 30 years. "This will only be the third time the firstborn does not become king," Xavier said. "The first time the keeper will have both of his sons as sovereign and keeper. I am a man blessed to have this privilege." Sebastian could not be sovereign. Gregory did not wish it. "We both know that of the four of us, Leo is the best suited to be king," Theo said, adding with a chuckle, "Besides, who would want it?" The position of king was a headache. He had often thanked deity that he was designated second-born, even though they would never know if he was first out of the womb. His brother filled the position of king perfectly. "We have moved the festivities forward," Theo informed his father. "As I have meditated upon it, I have realized that it is critical for Sebastian to give his soul into the keeping of his Kaylee on the day he turns 30. Will she be here by then? They should arrive at dawn. It will be a most interesting day. I must greet my brother," Theo said, "and you and Uncle Max should also be there." Theo turned to look at the statue of Zacharias, as if he was including their ancestor in the discussion. "Because they have both abdicated, Aunt Catherine should go with my cousins to the airport to greet the journalist, while the 3 members of the Strellaran go to greet the promise of deity as she makes her way into port." Xavier looked at his son with fondness. The position of spiritual leader was the source of true power in Estolia. Of the 4 young men raised so close together, he felt the selection of his own sons to fill the highest positions in the rising generation was the only logical choice. Sebastian found his Kaylee, but the promises of deity could never come true with her as queen. Gregory, while having a lot of promise, had some time to go before reaching maturity. He would never have been able to fulfill the duties of last resort. Chapter 12. Traveling to Estolia. When Amalia showed me her aura, I am certain that deity had a glorious hand in bringing me my Kaylee, and simultaneously fulfilling a lifelong dream. From 1928 to 1933 I was one of the laborers who helped to construct and maintain the airport at Mahatta. Then, after seclusion, the keeper asked me to help design the Amador airport. Creating something functional and extraordinary, in keeping with the beautiful soul of Estolia was, for me, tourism here in our waking world. Jbudu Carstairs, in Scrito. They were in the air 3 hours before Melanie asked the question Bethany hoped to avoid for the entire journey. It was inevitable that Melanie's enthrallment with the horses presented to her would eventually wear thin enough so she would want to know further details. Where, exactly, is this place? When they spoke on the phone, Xavier Zakarian had been adamant, I do not believe your friend would agree to the commission if she knew you were coming to Estolia. Once the airplane is in the air, however, you can safely tell her of your destination. Didn't I tell you already? Bethany asked. Bethany. I know that tone. Melanie's attention was now sharp. She looked around the luxury airplane and then back at her friend. What haven't you told me about this assignment? You didn't really want to know the details once you saw the possible bonus, Bethany pointed out. Beth, Estolian horses are like gold dust, there aren't many breeders, but they're divine in dressage, and gifted when it comes to jumping, and have superb stamina for cross-country competitions. You have no idea how valuable it would be to spend a year with a whole stable of Estolians to ride and choose from. There was no way I was going to turn it down. But now we're on the way, I do need to know the details of the assignment. Bethany said blithely, we will do a photo documentary of a nation, the state religion. Apparently, it's a critical year and they'll be doing all kinds of religious events over the next 12 months that we'll document. You'll have plenty of free time to exercise your passion. Yes, but what nation? What religion? Estolia. This was the sticking point. Xavier could not tell Bethany whether Melanie even knew Sebastian was from Estolia. Melanie frowned slightly. I've heard of Estolia, but I can't remember where I heard of it. Is it one of the tiny European countries? Bethany was relieved. Estolia is in the Mediterranean. It's a small island nation. At dinner, Xavier said, I have commissioned a photojournalist to document the transition. The airplane will be arriving simultaneously with the promise of deity. Xavier addressed Sebastian and Gregory. I do not wish them to arrive unheralded. It is best that the 2 of you, along with your mother, should greet them at the airport. Your father, Theo, and I, will travel to the dock so that we can inform Leo of the change in his status. If he has already placed his soul in Jackie's keeping, they will go directly to the temple. What suite has been prepared for the journalist? Asked Gregory. I believe the journalist is bringing an assistant. It might be a husband and wife team. I did not get the details, Xavier said, I have put them in the Northwest Tower suite. They will be with us through the birth of Leo's son, and his coronation, at the very least. Chapter 13. Arrival. After Kavanaugh and William were buried, the impact on the youth of Estolia was profoundly different from the aftermath of Apollyon. Not one Estolian chose to leave the island as a result. In fact, one could argue that the youth grew closer to one another and to the older generations as a result. Many traditions were created during the years between the two iniquitous heirs apparent, and the ability to rely upon those traditions gave a sense of security and permanence to the rising generation, at the time when they needed it the most. Christopher Chimerian Zakarian, Capitulo 57. Leo pulled a large garment bag out of one of the closets in his cabin and went to Jackie's room. He paused outside her door, remembering the sweet sensation of her possession of him. Yesterday she wanted them to sleep together again, but he had been forced to explain that, having given his soul into her keeping, he was constrained to wait for official sanction before he could touch her again. He tapped on her door. When he heard her calling out to him, he took a deep breath and entered her cabin. There was quite a brisk wind all night. We will arrive in less than an hour. When we docked in Tenerife, I was given a package. Visitors are rare, and the family are likely to be dressed up to receive you. My mother had the foresight to send you a dress. Will you honor my mother's effort and wear the dress she sent? Jackie took the heavy garment bag. A blush colored her cheeks and he could imagine what she was thinking. He was thinking about it too. I will be back in 45 minutes. Jackie opened the garment bag. The dress inside was extravagant, beautiful, and medieval. The fabric was a light sage green with panels of violet purple on either side along with dark royal purple short sleeves. Once dressed, she left her cabin and went up to the deck. The sky was a lighter grey to the east, the bulk of land obscured the horizon. Leo appeared, leaning down to kiss her. She gave herself up to him, reveling in the feel of his strong body, the warmth of his contours, the heat of his desire. He pulled back when they heard a discreet cough. The captain was grinning at them. I believe we will be at the dock just as the sun rises, he said. Your father has commanded you to dress in full regalia. We have just enough time for you to change. Jackie turned her attention to the approaching island. In the dimness of pre-dawn, the world was monochrome, blurring out the finer details. Streamers of orange, red, yellow, peach, and cream started to festoon the skies. Shouts from the men rang through the air as they prepared to secure the ship to its berth. To add to the cacophony, the sails flapped and slapped while the floorboards creaked. The sea air was cool on her bare arms, the sharp tang of sea salt and the green scent of vegetation swirling around one another. A firm tread behind her had her turning to look at Leo. He wore a richly embroidered cape over a fancy shirt in purple and green. A sword was strapped to his side and white gloves seemed to give the entire outfit a sense of legitimacy. He tucked his hat under one elbow before holding his hand out to her. As the captain had predicted, the boat was secured to the dock at the very moment the sun tipped over the edge of the world. The world went from monochrome to polychromatic splendor. 3 men approached the boat, one in a wheelchair. As the sun finally tipped over the world, Leo was focused on the extraordinary, beautiful woman at his side. He ached to join with her again, to have her as a permanent part of his life. Watching the enchantment on her face as the world gained color and depth reminded him that she had chosen his soul to keep. He heard a shout and looked up, smiling with pleasure to see his father approaching. After he shouted a hello back, he extended his arm so he could escort his bride to-be onto Estolian soil. Once they reached the dock, he turned his attention back to his father, but the sight of his brother stopped him. Theo, he said, his eyes on the sash his brother wore. Theo inclined his head only slightly, the purpose, the office of last resort clearly at the forefront of his mind. He could not, if he was the last resort, do or be anything to Leo until the situation was resolved. Leo looked from his father and brother to his uncle, who was smiling, relaxed. Something monumental and unique must have taken place while he was away. If Theo was last resort, Leo was heir apparent. Theo stepped forward, one hand gripping the dagger in the sash. The strength of purpose on his face was clear. As last resort, I Theobald Reginald Zakarian, ask your intentions, Leo. Have you given your soul into the keeping of this woman? Leo drew himself up proudly, gently positioning Jackie in front of him, his hand resting over her abdomen, as he said with great dignity, I, Balthazar Leopold Zakarian, have taken this woman, Jacqueline Renee Cathay, and in so doing, have placed my soul securely within her keeping. Theo turned his attention to Jackie. My brother claims that he did take your purity. Did you willingly give this to him? Leo could only squeeze her tight in reassurance. She raised her chin. I did willingly give him my heart, my soul, and my body. Do you accept Balthazar Leopold Zakarian, along with his soul which already rests within your keeping? Or do you reject him? I accept everything Leo is, and everything he ever will be, she said. Xavier wheeled closer and said, Do you, Balthazar Leopold Zakarian, accept the woman as your Kaylee, or do you require your brother to exercise his role as the last resort? I accept Jackie as my Kaylee. She is a worthy daughter of Estolia. Without her, I cannot live. This morning you will both enter the temple to complete your 7 days of seclusion which you began on the promise of deity, thereafter to have your union sanctified by the Spirit, the Church, and the State. On the eve of your cousin's birthday, Xavier rolled closer to where Jackie stood and placed a hand over Leo's. He closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them. You will fulfill the promise of Zacharias, a son will be born to you, the future king of Estolia. Deity smiles upon your union. Chapter 14. Power of Love. A week of seclusion following the exchange brings strength to each couple. His soul settles within her keeping, and she, in turn, learns how to gently keep and nurture his soul and the son that completes the exchange. Ignatius Siderius, Capitulo 33. The airplane sat on the tarmac for several minutes. Bethany's heart rate accelerated. Melanie would realize what she had done. Hopefully, it was the right thing for her friend. If nothing else, she reasoned, Melanie would get the type of horse she had coveted for years. Your luggage will be transported to the palace, to your rooms there, one of the unobtrusive stewardesses said. A set of mobile stairs was pushed up to the airplane. As they descended the stairs, Bethany took in the entire scene. 2 carriages waited with 2 men and a woman standing near the base of the air stairs. In addition to the horses harnessed to the carriages, another half-dozen horses and riders were nearby. Melanie was entranced by the sight of the horses. She didn't notice the 3 individuals moving forward to greet them. Bethany recognized Sebastian. He had eyes only for Melanie. The hungry look in his eyes was embarrassing, and she looked away. The second man was looking at her, and their eyes met. His eyes were amber-colored, and his expression was good-natured. Melanie. Sebastian's voice cracked. Melanie shifted her attention from the horses to the man in front of her. He looked at her like she was the beginning and the end of his world. Sebastian. The emotions in her voice mirrored his. He shook his head, dazed, and then recalled his manners. Melanie, Bethany, may I present my mother, Catherine Moravia Zakarian, Queen of Estolia and my father's Kaylee. Mother, this is Melanie Andrews and Bethany Danielson. The exquisitely dressed woman stepped forward and embraced Melanie, kissing both her cheeks before doing the same with Bethany. Thank you, she whispered. Bethany, Melanie, this is my brother, Gregory Anakaris Zakarian. Gregory, this is Bethany and Melanie. Once the introductions were over, Sebastian pulled Melanie over to one of the carriages, leaving Bethany to travel in the other one. Gregory helped his mother into the remaining carriage before gesturing for her to climb into the vehicle ahead of him. Once the horses were in motion, Gregory said, My uncle told us, after you were on your way, what he had done. He hoped that if your friend came to Estolia, she and my brother would overcome whatever caused them to separate. I think they will. I believe you're right. She turned her attention to the beautiful woman and said, I had no idea his mother was the queen of anything. Does that make him a prince? Gregory was the one who answered, my brother was to be the next king of Estolia. He believed your friend would not meet the requirements for queen of Estolia. He abdicated so he would be free to pursue her. She would never have guessed that Sebastian was a prince or planned to be king. Melanie would be disturbed when she learned what he'd done. Her eyes were troubled when they met Gregory's. His expression was enigmatic as he explained, he abdicated because he knew it was impossible for him to fulfill the requirements of being king. For him, the joy of making that decision was knowing he was free to pursue the only woman on the planet whom he could ever love. She hoped Sebastian could reach through the wall that separated them. She can't have children, she volunteered. I thought it would be something like that. She loves him. I do not doubt it, he said. I am glad you brought her here. Oh, she said, as realization hit her. What is it? Then you will be king someday? She asked. No, he said, smiling broadly. I chose to also abdicate at the same time as my brother. You also love a woman who cannot be queen? The requirements must be tremendous. He laughed outright. No, Bethany, it is not that complicated. Your friend could not be queen because she cannot have children. Those who have become queen have been serving girls, slaves, stowaways, nannies, heiresses, and simple country girls. The requirement to be queen is fertility and... He paused. Well, that is enough of that. What were you going to say? She had to ask. He had flushed slightly. His mother spoke then, virginity, my dear. If a woman has been loose with her favors, she cannot fulfill the requirements of Zacharias, and would never be seen to be the correct woman for the heir to the throne. It was Bethany's turn to blush. She looked at Gregory and wondered if he was in love with someone impure. He correctly interpreted her unasked question. In my case, I knew that I was not the right man to be king. My cousin Leo is perfect as king. When he returns today, he will learn that he is the heir apparent. His smile was broad. The pressure for me is off. I can move forward happily without the burden of the crown. Speaking to her son, the Queen of Estolia said, perhaps you can assist Bethany when her friend is occupied with your brother. She had a slight smile on her lips. I would be delighted to help you, Bethany, he said. Chapter 15. Celebrations. When I first spent time in the United States, I was fascinated, particularly, by the way television shows and movies depicted romantic relationships. I pitied them for their misfortune in being born without the guidance of deity. Rhiannon Amador, Essay on Love. Sebastian stared at Melanie. Even if she couldn't hold his soul, he didn't care. There would never be another woman for him. He would forego the blessings associated with placing his soul in the keeping of a woman rather than live without her. She was everything he needed in his life. Sebastian, she whispered, I didn't know we were coming to your country. Her face was white, her hands were trembling. I am glad you are here, he was firm. It is a good year for you to learn about my people, my faith. He picked up both of her hands, holding them tightly. I can think of nothing more destined to bring me happiness than having you here, in my country, at this time. Her eyes searched his, looking for answers within. I haven't changed from the person I was when last we met. Her voice was sharp. He gripped her hands tightly when she started to withdraw, squeezing them as he said, I have not been happy since we have been apart. I should never have left you. They traveled in silence for a time before she tilted her head to the side and asked, "Your mother is a queen. Does that make you a prince?" "Yes, I am a prince. You should see me in my full royal outfit." "Actually, you will. I am sure your friend will take many photographs. Will you consent to be my partner at the celebration ball?" "I will not consent to a casual tumble in bed, Sebastian Zakarian," she said. "I value myself too highly." "Melanie, I also value you highly. I respect you, and your boundaries. Will you partner me to the ball?" She inclined her head before asking, "What is being celebrated?" "My cousin is spending a week in seclusion with his bride-to-be. At the end of the week, they will marry. The celebration is something like a wedding reception. That will also be the eve of my 30th birthday, so it is dual purpose." "Do you have an older brother?" Melanie asked. "No. I have a younger brother." "You will be king someday." He shook his head. "I was disqualified, the most I will ever be is prince." He grinned. "I have never been so relieved. When I abdicated, my brother did too. My cousin, the one who is in seclusion with his bride-to-be, is now the future king." She frowned. "It doesn't bother you?" "Not at all. I could not be king without the woman I wanted for my queen." Melanie's eyes widened as she took in his meaning. "Are you saying you abdicated because of me?" His expression was gentle, his thumbs rubbing the back of each hand that he still held. "Melanie, I knew when I met you there would never be another woman for me. The requirements for our future queen are very minimal, but you could not hold the position. To be king, I had to be married, and if I could not find a woman to marry who was acceptable, I could not be king. In a way, it is because of you, but it was more about the requirements being out of your reach. I would rather be with you." "You shouldn't have done that," she said sharply. "You should have found someone else. Why would you do that? I'm not worth giving up a crown." "Melanie, you are worth it to me. Perhaps after this celebration month is over, you and I can discuss exactly why this was literally the only choice I had. Please, remember that I am happy with my choice. My father, the king, is happy with it, as is my brother, who also abdicated. My cousin and uncle, our spiritual leaders, have stated that it was the right decision." Was all that information about Estolia just a ruse to get me here? "I did not know you were coming here, if you will recall. I do not know what you were promised. Estolians originate in my country. In fact, one of the things I was thinking of doing, now that I will not be king, is work in the royal stables, specifically with the Estolians." "Bethany and I will be here for a year," Melanie said. "Will that bother you?" "Not a bit. It saves me from choosing to forego the celebrations. I was trying to figure out which ones I could afford to skip so I could find you and convince you to come and visit Estolia." Jackie traced patterns on Leo's chest, thinking about everything that took place as they arrived. He brought her to the seclusion suite and told her they would use the suite for the first few days of their union, as part of the marriage process. "We will be officially married when we are done with our 7 days?" she asked. "There is a formal ceremony after the 7 days, a confirmation that the spirit does accept our union. It is a formality, but is special nonetheless." "What exactly happened at the dock?" He cleared his throat before answering her. "When my cousin decided it was impossible for him to become the king, he abdicated. If he was not capable, normally it would be his younger brother who would become the new heir apparent. However, Gregory, Sebastian's younger brother, turned it down instantly. He knew himself well enough to know he was not suited as king. If none of the king's sons are suitable to become the new king, then next in line for the throne are the sons of the king's younger brother. I am his oldest son. When Sebastian and Gregory abdicated, I became the heir apparent." "That means you are to be king?" she asked. He leaned towards her and kissed her for some time before answering, "Yes, Jackie, in 9 months, when you give birth to our son, a week later we will become the king and queen of Estolia." "I don't know that I'll make a very good queen," she said reluctantly. You are perfect for Estolia, he countered. Both of my cousins were unhappy with their future roles. My younger brother and I, on the other hand, are both pleased it has resolved itself in this way. It is an accepted axiom here in Estolia that those whose burdens are greatest receive commensurate blessings. Am I really pregnant? She asked. Her hand lay over her abdomen. Zacharias, our founder, was promised by deity that, if the heir to the throne always waited until his 30th year to marry a virgin, and married her within 7 days of their first intimacy, remaining true to her always, then Estolia would always know prosperity. In addition, as a mark of the benevolence of deity, and to demonstrate deity is still with us, each Estolian couple will have a son born to them, conceived during the exchange. You will always keep my soul. I have taken your purity. Deity will give us a son, indicating that our connection is inspired. I have no doubts whatsoever that you are pregnant with our son, the future king of Estolia. The solemn sanctification ceremony for Jackie and Leo took place in the beautiful cathedral built near the entrance to the temple. The couple glowed with their love for each other. Melanie hoped fervently that somehow, she and Sebastian would come together. She wanted to experience a love as profound and moving as the love of the newlyweds. After the ceremony, she and Sebastian, with the rest of the entourage, traveled back to the palace in open-top carriages. Their carriage had 4 dapple-grey Andistolians. Sebastian told her that it was rare for Andistolians to be white and they were reserved for the king and his immediate family. It was hard for Melanie to pay as much attention to the celebrations as she should have. She was enjoying being with Sebastian too much. They were dancing together when she asked Sebastian, "Is it my imagination, or have we been unable to spend any time alone since I got here?" He laughed. She had missed the rich, vibrant sound of his happiness slipping through her nerve endings during the 4 months they were apart. My family have conspired to force me to wait until my 30th birthday prior to being alone with you. Why? Because, Mel, in Estolia a man does not marry before he is 30, and he does not consummate the union with the woman he plans to marry before the eve of that birthday. She wondered if he meant what she thought he meant. He must have sensed the stillness within her because he clarified, "In case it is not clear, Melanie, I plan to marry you just as soon as I am able to do so." He stopped dancing and cupped her face with both hands, looking at her, searching her eyes. "Will you marry me, Melanie, be mine for the rest of our lives together, be my everything?" "Oh yes, Sebastian. Once you left, I stopped living. You are my everything." Chapter 16. Rewards of Sacrifice. The riches to be found in the greater world can never supersede those found within the arms of Estolia, in the bosom of the temple placed securely within Mount Estoliana. Fernando Gilmer Zacharian, Capítulo 75. At the ball, Melanie danced with each of the Zacharian men. Theo danced with her after Sebastian's proposal. "Has my cousin made his intentions known to you yet?" he asked her. "He's asked me to be his everything." In Estolia, Melanie, a man is blessed if he consummates his future union upon the eve of his 30th birthday. 7 days later he marries her, and his are the greatest of all blessings. "He will try to seduce you tonight." Melanie didn't know how to respond to this man. "I speak with you about this not to cause you embarrassment, but because it is important that you understand his frame of reference, the beliefs that are a critical part of his self-identity. Each Estolian is given great peace when difficult decisions are made and the result is pleasing to deity. Sebastian felt profound peace when he abdicated. He knew you were the only woman capable of keeping his soul." He stopped dancing and placed his hands on her shoulders, saying, "Sebastian will only know happiness if you promise to walk through life as both his partner and his wife. Have faith in him and in yourself." Before she could respond, Theo stepped back a pace, bowed to her, and then turned and left her side. A touch on her elbow caught her attention. It was Sebastian's younger brother, Gregory, taking her into his arms to continue the dance with her. My brother is a very lucky man. But he abdicated because of me. And I shall be grateful until my dying day. If he did not abdicate, I would have been forced to be keeper, a role for which I had no aptitude. The only job I was less suited for was king. When Sebastian abdicated, I was given the freedom to do the same. You will never know how profound the peace from deity that washed over me upon making that monumental decision. Bemused, she observed, "Your family is peculiar. Ours is the most blessed nation in the world. I know you will bring my brother the happiness he deserves." His confusing response resonated within her. The celebrations were almost over when Leo asked her to dance. "Does it bother you that I've made Sebastian abdicate?" she asked him. "I did not grow up expecting to be king, but my father tells me that it has always been my destiny. You merely showed him the pathway." Sebastian, with a flourish, cut into his cousin's dance, saying firmly, "This is my dance, cousin, go back to your lovely bride." Melanie melted into Sebastian's arms. They felt so right around her, holding her. She was disappointed when the music ended and the musicians began packing up their instruments. Would he really seduce her? She was disappointed when he escorted her back towards the tower guest suite. When he guided her down one of the wide hallways, her pulse rate increased, especially when he opened a set of double doors and led her into a suite of rooms. A luxurious bed was barely visible through a half-open door. She held her breath, and her heart felt like it was leaping in her chest when she focused her attention on him. "Will you be mine, Melanie? Body, self, and soul? Will you give yourself to me?" She could never be happy apart from him. With deliberation, she pulled her hair to one side and presented him with her back, hoping he would see, in that one simple action, her acquiescence. His sharp intake of breath was the first indication that he had received the message. His fingers were cool on the nape of her neck, as he brushed a few stray strands of hair to the side, and began to fumble with the hook and eye fasteners, the laces and zippers. She shivered in reaction to the kiss he bestowed on her shoulder as he pushed the dress down off her body. Eve must have felt like this, she realized, powerful and in control. He unfastened her bra, freeing her breasts. His touch was like gossamer silk, a brief tantalizing moment of intimacy before she heard him step away from her. He was undressing, and she watched him, fascinated. Once his shirt was draped on the back of a nearby chair, she admired the structure of his body, the muscles rippling under the skin, the scattering of golden hair on his chest. He paused when the only clothing left was a pair of briefs. "Your soul entices mine, Melanie. I love you." He took her into his arms and kissed her, igniting an inferno of passion, a tumultuous tsunami of touch and taste. Their last items of apparel disappearing in a flurry of kisses and caresses. "Will you be mine forever? Sebastian, there is no other man for me. I love you. Forever sounds like heaven here on earth." He kissed her again, their bodies merging. He paused only a moment as he encountered the innocence she had denied possessing. Her legs locked around his hips, his thoughts were muted by the sensations flowing through him. Together, they experienced the most profound blessing that came with the promise of Zacharias. Afterwards, Melanie rested against his chest. He knew, now. She had lied about her wild youth. Would he reject her for that lie? A lie which caused him to give up his crown. His voice was thick with emotion when he said, "I knew you were the only woman I could ever love. I was willing to forego the blessings promised." He crushed her close to his body. "They have not been denied to us. I shall never be able to properly describe the sweet sensation of your soul taking mine into its keeping. In all the capítulos, not one Estolian has ever properly explained what it meant to give one's soul into the keeping of their spouse. I never should have lied. No, Melanie, deity inspired you to tell me the one thing I needed to hear to know I could not be king. I was never meant to hold the office. But I was always meant to give my soul into your keeping. Had you told me you were pure, I might have tried to defy the promise of Zacharias and install you as the future queen. No, we have been guided by deity so our choices would be clearly defined. You aren't mad at me? She asked in a small voice. No. I am grateful you were receptive to the promptings of deity. Our historians will always look upon this event as further evidence of the continuing presence of deity in our lives. Sebastian looked at the clock in the bedchamber. He climbed out of the bed, opened a chest to pull out a bathrobe. After he shrugged into it, he handed her a long nightgown. If I know my uncle, he and Theo will be visiting us in about 5 minutes. Chapter 17. Orderly Succession. I can still recall, nearly 40 years later, that moment when I realized that my son would be the heir apparent. Twice I was told his future during blessings. But it was only as I watched my second son Ezekiel playing with his cousin Gregorio that it suddenly struck me forcefully that my son, by the traditions of Estolia, should not be referred to as the heir apparent. Gregorio was, by the natural order of things, the next king of Estolia. Theo must have noted my discomfort, because he assured me that I was not only the rightful king, but that my son was to be the next king. This is, Theo cautioned me, the will of deity. Gregorio will discover great happiness in his future, and will be content to allow Isaiah to wear the crown and feel the burdens placed so heavily upon the sovereign. He will also fervently pray to deity that Ezekiel will become the keeper of the soul of Estolia. I knew from the quality of his voice that deity was speaking to me, and that his word was, therefore, final. Balthazar Leopold Zakarian, Capitulo 87. While Melanie slipped into the nightgown, Sebastian went to the rumpled clothing on the floor near the door and scooped everything up so he could create a tidy pile on one chair. When the clock began to chime, he slid behind her and put his arms around her. The echoes of the chimes accompanied the door's opening. The king held one of the doors open, while Sebastian's cousin, Theo, held the other, and his uncle Xavier wheeled into the room. All three men had solemn expressions, and Melanie wondered if she misunderstood the things they said to her earlier. Xavier halted in front of them, the other two men standing even with his shoulders. Sebastian? I have placed my soul securely within Melanie's keeping, Sebastian responded. Xavier looked at Melanie. My nephew claims that he has taken your purity, and in return, you keep his soul. No woman is constrained to remain unwillingly. Do you accept Sebastian Guillermo Zakarian, or do you reject him? I could never reject Sebastian, Melanie said, shocked. He rolled closer and set his hand over where Sebastian's hand rested on her abdomen. He looked up at the two of them sharply. Sebastian, bring a couple of pillows over here, Xavier commanded. Melanie felt bereft for a moment when Sebastian moved away from her. He picked up two of the ornamental pillows and set them in front of her. Melanie, may I give you a blessing? Will you consent? She looked at Sebastian. His smile was reassuring. She turned to the man in the wheelchair and said, What do I do? Kneel on these pillows. Theo and I will place our hands upon your head. We will say a type of prayer over you. Melanie followed their instructions, her eyes meeting Sebastian's and feeling reassured by the love within them. Xavier's accent was more pronounced as he spoke, his blessing was in English.
Melanie Christine Andrews. Deity influences our lives in subtle ways. Since the beginning of our nation, we have felt the gentle push to fulfill the promise Zacharias made to deity, so we might feel the blessings deity promised him. Sebastian, having been born 87th in line for the throne, was never destined to wear the crown, nor to bear the burdens of being the king of Estolia. In meeting you, Melanie, Sebastian recognized you were the only woman capable of keeping his soul. It is an accepted truth that the greatest sacrifices lead to the most profound blessings. Your life together will be filled with joy. You will work with Sebastian to refine the Estolian breed, and ultimately this work will serve the purposes of deity. You will discover peace in your decisions, and will always know that your joy in life is your reward for the willingness to sacrifice. While you leave no children here upon this planet, know that your actions will have a lasting impact on both this nation and on the greater world. Deity smiles upon you. I say these things in the light and sight of deity.
Melanie got to her feet, moved by the heartfelt hug the king gave her. Only then did she believe that Sebastian's family was glad she was with him. "You will spend a week in the royal seclusion suite," Xavier said. "When you are finished with your seclusion, and the spirit confirms your alliance, Sebastian will study in the temple for his elder year. After, you will both be apprenticed to the stable master, to take over his role when he retires." The squall of young Isaiah punctuated the words of the ceremony to transfer the crown from Maximiliano to his nephew. Xavier looked out at the various participants in the living drama that was the ruling family of Estolia. His heart surged with pride and love. He was proud of his son, Leo, as his brother placed the crown upon his head. Young Jackie was transformed. She was no longer an isolated young woman kept at home caring for her father, battered emotionally and psychologically. Now she was every inch the queen of Estolia. The glow of love, motherhood, and happiness colored her features and gave her the presence every queen was described as possessing. Sebastian's joy was transparent and sincere. While he grew up expecting, for the first 30 years of his life, to be king, it was clear he had no regrets as he watched the crown being placed upon Leo's head. It was a privilege to have his son become king. He was also moved by Sebastian's demeanor. He would never be king, never a father, yet his joy was as profound as Jackie's. Deity was still watching out for the sons and daughters of Zacharias. He focused on his second son, Theo. Taller than average and awkward, he would make a fine keeper. He didn't know every element of his second son's future, but his pathway in life would hold both profound happiness as well as true heart-wrenching sorrow. He closed his eyes, knowing that in some way, Deity would teach his second son a lesson he, Xavier, did not personally have the strength to learn. Perhaps, he thought, perhaps there were some lessons better not learned. He reached up and wiped away a tear as he turned his attention away from his son. The next individual he looked at was his nephew Gregory. He knew Gregory was in love with Melanie's former partner Bethany. He frowned when he saw the kiss Gregory bestowed on her. If Xavier did not act, Gregory was at risk of taking Bethany's purity well in advance of his 30th birthday. He was about to turn away, to look at some of the other members of the family, but there was something about the couple that disturbed him. After a couple of moments, he forced himself to look away. His eyes then focused on the one person guaranteed to distract him. Harmony. The impact of her sweet presence in his life hit him. This woman had exchanged souls with him. No other son of Zacharias was given the privilege and obligation of holding the soul of another. And, in holding her soul, he knew it was but a proxy to represent the souls of every Estolian who embraced the promise of Zacharias and lived their lives in accordance with the faith. She was the only woman asked to give up her soul. With the strength her soul gave him, he was able to meet the needs of all Estolians. No other Estolian was given a gift as profound as that shared by the keeper and his Kaylee, and no other Estolian was asked to make so great a sacrifice in the day-to-day running of the nation. What would be, would be. He and Harmony, and all of Estolia, could only face each challenge as they came, keeping the promise of Zacharias firmly in front of them. Deity would cushion the blows life would send, comfort the grief sure to be felt, bring hope to the hopeless, and give strength to those who needed it. He extended one hand to Harmony, and sighed as the warmth of her touch, and the sensation of his soul spread through him. Yes, they would face it, together.